imagine, ask yourself this question. Why across time and place, in different religions, as a cross-cultural phenomenon, why did people invent blood sacrifice? Why did people imagine that the gods or God like carrion? Why do gods want dead animals? And if it was just one people, you could say, well, it was peculiar, but cross-culturally there is blood sacrifice. Animals are sacrificed to God or the gods. Why did they even think that the gods like carrion? Now, before we go on, one word, let's get it straight. Sacrifice. If you could bracket in your mind anything you've ever thought about it for the moment, it's a Latin-derived word from two Latin words, sacrum facere, to make sacred. So if you know nothing else, the word sacrifice means you're making something sacred. So hold on to that for a moment and come back to my question. Why did people invent blood sacrifice? Now, for answer, I'm not going into theology, I'm going into anthropology, as it were, 101. Basic anthropology. Why cross-culturally, across time and place, do different religions invent blood sacrifice? A sheep, a goat, a bull. Why? Why would they come up with something like that? Forget about gods and theology. Think just of ordinary human relations, because that's where it all begins. That's where it always begins. In ordinary human relations, there are two major ways of maintaining good relations with your friends or restoring them if there's been a row. Two main ways: the gift and the meal. Now, this is not rocket science. It's very basic. It's something we all know. If you get a Christmas gift from somebody to whom you had no intention of even sending a card, what do you feel you should want to do? Hustle out and get a more or less comparative gift, and if you could predate it, that would be very nice, and get it off. Gift has a sort of reciprocity involved in it. That's why it is a way of keeping and maintaining good relations. And it's also possible, if we've had a row, to restore good relations by offering a gift. So reciprocity is always there. Even if I give you a gift just to say I like you, well, I like you. It's reciprocal for liking you. So we all know that. That's basic human nature. The meal. The meal. If I invite you, let's say we've had a row, and I want to patch things up. I invite you to a meal. I invite you to a meal. And somehow the meal is symbolic of our patching up. As we share the meal, we renew our friendship or our good relations. All of that is basic. We understand it. But now think about it a bit. In the ancient world, if I was, let's say I had a row with you, and I want to ask you to come to a festive meal, I'm probably not going to offer you hummus and pita bread or vegetable soup. That's kind of almost insulting. If I invite you to a make-up meal, or simply a meal, a festive meal to keep good relations, an animal is going to die. When the prodigal son comes home, the fatted calf is killed for the feast. And nobody asks the opinion of the fatted calf on the whole operation. So it's taken for granted. It's taken for granted that if there is a reconciliation meal, or even a meal that keeps good relations, an animal may die. And we might tend to forget that because we get our meat saran wrapped in the grocery store and we haven't seen the blood. But even when I was growing up in Ireland, we could go into the fields behind our house, we could see the butcher come and take a sheep in the cart down to the town, and we would run down and get into the back streets behind the butcher shop, and we would watch the animal being killed, and we would watch it being hung up, still looking very much like a sheep, in the front window. We knew that meat meant blood. We knew that if you ate meat, an animal had died. Now, hold on to that. That's basic human experience. That's what we do. You could say, without the shedding of blood, there is no reconciliation. Now, I'm just talking on the human level. Now, take that from the human level to the divine level. Supposing we being any people in any religion that uses blood sacrifice, we want to maintain or we want to restore good relations with God or the gods. And we might, let's say there's been a drought 3 years in a row. Maybe the gods are angry with us, or maybe we've done something to displease them, or maybe they're just ignoring us, they're busy somewhere else. Let's get their attention. Gift or meal. Those are the two operations. The example I want to use for this is the Celtic tradition. First example. I'll use the Jewish tradition as well, but the Celtic tradition first. Not just because I'm Irish, but because there's very good evidence of this. In the Celtic tradition, supposing we want to give a gift to the gods, what would we give them and where would we give them? Wherever the gods dwell. In the Celtic tradition, all across Northern Europe, all the way to Ireland, the gods dwell underneath the water. They don't dwell above the sky because we don't live in a Mediterranean climate where there's a gorgeous blue sky way up there, or a Middle Eastern climate. In Ireland and in Northern Europe, most of the time, we never see the sky. Kind of have to believe it's up there. It kind of sits on top of the trees. So the gods dwell underneath the waters. So if I want to get in contact with them or give them a gift, I have to go where they live. Duh, of course. They live especially in bogs, because bogs are mysterious. You can't tell where, are they land or water or sky? I mean, they're misty. The land, the sky, the water, all seems to merge there. The gods are there. So if I want to give a gift to the gods, I will take it to the bog. You know, when you go into the National Museum in Dublin, you notice all of these magnificent, and they are magnificent, gold ornaments. Better stuff than the Romans ever made, by the way. And if you read very detailed, you find a lot of it comes from the bog. You think, the Irish are careless. They keep losing their stuff in the bog. Of course not. These were made as precious artifacts, never worn by a human being, and laid on the bog as a gift to the gods. And of course, they slowly, surely, went down into the bog. Of course. So if you're in the Celtic tradition and you want to maintain good relations with the gods, or there's been a major crisis and you really want to get their attention and give them a big gift, and of course, you're always expecting something back. As I've said, let's say you have a drought. You give a gift to the gods. Doesn't work. Second year of the drought, bigger gift. Third year of the drought, biggest gift you can come up with. So, when you look at what you find in the bogs as gifts to the gods across the Celtic tradition and the Celtic world, and you find almost anything you can imagine. You find, for example, iron weapons. A sword taken and turned into a pretzel. It's been forged and never used by a human being. It's been turned into a kind of a pretzel shape so it couldn't be used, and it's deposited on the bog for the gods. I've mentioned already jewelry, magnificent gold and silver jewelry, made and never used, made, taken apart and given to the gods. And now we come to human sacrifice. What if you wanted to give the god the most magnificent gift you could imagine? What about, say, a king's son, the heir apparent, or a tribal chieftain's son, the heir apparent to the chiefdom? What gift would be adequate if the crisis, of course, is huge? So we find human beings dedicated, sacrificed to the gods. And if you really wanted to ask, were they willing or not? I don't mean did they want to be dead. I don't mean that. I mean, but if the theology is that we are in crisis here and we have to give a gift to the God which is big enough and important enough, and you have been chosen because you're the son of the chieftain, without necessarily wanting it, liking it, you could accept it. So, for example, when you look at Tolland Man or Lindau Man found near Manchester and probably put to death around say the 60s of the 1st century CE, and you look at his nails and they're magnificently manicured. So he's not a peasant, he's not worked hard, and he has no wounds on his body, and he has no parts of his body rubbed by wearing any sort of armor or anything like that. This is probably maybe a druid, maybe even a druid's son, maybe somebody who's the most precious person they have. And this person is offered to a sacrifice because in the 60s of the 1st century, in England, which we now call England, in Britain, this is the worst probably year of their lives. The revolt of Queen Boudica has been put down by the Romans. She is dead. The Druids have been slaughtered. They came out against the Romans en masse, and the Romans slaughtered them. There's been no harvest. This is the worst year. A great sacrifice is required. This person's life has been sacrum faciurit, in Latin, made sacred as a gift to the gods. You don't have to like it, by the way. You do have to understand it. And you do have to think not that they are savages. This is their gift to the gods, demanding, of course, reciprocity and expecting it. Now let me shift from the Celtic tradition with gift to the Jewish tradition with meal. Supposing I want to have a meal with my God. I know how to have a meal with a friend. I have to go wherever the friend lives. I have to invite them to my house, or I have to go to their house. I know how to do all of that stuff. How do I have a meal with my God? I take a sheep, for example, at Passover, to the temple in Jerusalem. Why do I go there? Because that's where God hangs out. I go there and the blood is laid on the altar. Now what has happened when the blood is laid on the altar is that the sheep, the life of the sheep has been given to God, and therefore the sheep is now, let me put it bluntly, sacred mutton. It's a divine lamb. It has been given to God. If it comes back to me, I am feasting with my God. If it comes back to me as sacred meat, I am now feasting with my God. So the Passover is a meal with God. And sometimes I run into criticism of that, and I would accept it from people who ethically never eat meat, but I cannot accept it from any of us who ordinarily eat meat and do this. Take it for granted. They are just doing the same thing with their God. So the sacrifice of the sheep is simply a gift given to God, given back to them. There is no hint anywhere in any of this anthropology of substitution or of making the animal suffer. The animal is killed, yes, of course. And the meat is given to you, and you eat it with your God. You can like it or you can dislike it, but it is understandable. And the clearest way to see this is to think of the scapegoat. The scapegoat. Is the scapegoat sacrificed? Of course not. The scapegoat, on the Day of Atonement, the sins of the people are symbolically deposited on the goat. The goat is now the most unclean, as it were, symbolic item you could imagine. How could that be sacrificed to God as a gift? You would be giving God the most unclean thing you could imagine, a mass of the sins of all the people. So of course, the scapegoat can never be sacrificed. What happens to the scapegoat in the ritual of the Day of Atonement is when the sins of the people are symbolically laid on it, it's ushered out into the desert, out of the civilized place of the city, out into the desert. Does it die there? Of course not. Goats do real good in the desert. Their job description is to create it when they don't find it. They eat the grass right down till there's nothing left. So the goat probably does fine. There's probably a whole bunch of them out there, and say, here's the new scapegoat. So the whole idea of taking sacrifice and confusing it with substitution, as if anyone was saying, God, you should put us to death, but let's take it out on the sheep. Nobody is thinking like that. Not in the whole anthropology of blood sacrifice anywhere in the world is anyone thinking of substitution. They're thinking about gift. Nowhere in the anthropology of sacrifice is anyone thinking of suffering. We should suffer for what we have done. Let's take it out on the sheep. They're not thinking of suffering or of sacrifice. They're thinking of gift and meal.